David thought he had the perfect life, a loving wife, 2 beautiful children, and a stable, happy home. But when a suspicious change in Jenna's behavior leads him to uncover her affair, his world is turned upside down. Fueled by heartbreak and rage, David prepares for a bitter confrontation, only to discover that Jenna has been hiding something far more devastating. As secrets unravel and betrayals cut deep, David is forced to grapple with a tragic truth that will change everything he thought he knew about love, forgiveness, and the fragile nature of trust. In a gripping tale of deceit and redemption, can David find peace amid the wreckage of his shattered family? Or will the truth be too much to bear? The rain drummed softly against the car roof as I sat parked outside Jenna's office building. The glow of her window on the 3rd floor was visible through the downpour, casting faint shadows on the sidewalk below. It was almost comforting, routine even. For years, I had come to pick her up from work when my schedule allowed. Tonight, though, something was different. She had texted me hours earlier, saying she had to work late, but my gut told me otherwise. Jenna and I had been married for a decade. We were partners in every sense, or so I thought. Together, we had built a life filled with warmth and stability. Our house was a haven of laughter and chaos, thanks to our 2 kids, Emily and Nathan. On paper, everything was perfect, but lately, a quiet unease had settled in, a shadow that refused to fade. It began subtly, as these things often do. Jenna's behavior started changing about 6 months ago. She became increasingly preoccupied, her phone seemingly glued to her hand. When I asked about her long hours at work, she waved it off, claiming new responsibilities at the firm required her attention. But her vague explanations didn't sit well with me. Tonight was no different. The way she had avoided eye contact when she mentioned working late had set off alarm bells. "Don't wait up for me," she'd said, her voice light and casual. But the slight quiver in her tone betrayed her. Unable to ignore my suspicions any longer, I decided to follow her after work. It felt like a betrayal of the trust one had always prided myself on, but I had to know the truth. At 7:30 p.m., Jenna's office light finally went out. I slid down in my seat as she emerged, umbrella in hand, and walked briskly to her car. My heart pounded as I tailed her, keeping a safe distance. She wasn't heading home. Instead, she drove to a boutique hotel across town, parking under the bright canopy of its entrance. A man was waiting for her there, and they embraced like old lovers. The sight was like a dagger to my chest. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. Rage, betrayal, and heartbreak flooded through me all at once, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for confrontation. I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof. The next day, I began my investigation. While Jenna was out, I combed through her things, her emails, her phone records, even her credit card statements. At first, everything seemed normal, but then I found it, a receipt from a jewelry store dated 2 weeks earlier. It wasn't for me. I hadn't received a gift or even a mention of the purchase. The receipt listed an expensive necklace, paid for with our joint account. Piece by piece, the puzzle began to take shape. Jenna's late nights at work were nothing more than a cover for her affair. The necklace wasn't for a client or a friend, it was for him. My suspicions were no longer just whispers in the dark, they were cold, hard facts. But I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. I needed more. The idea of her denying it, spinning excuses and half-truths, was unbearable. So, I did what any man pushed to his limits would do, I installed a tracking app on her phone. It felt invasive and wrong, but I justified it by telling myself that her betrayal had already shattered the sanctity of our marriage. Over the next week, the app confirmed everything I feared. Her trips weren't to the places she claimed, and her meetings weren't with clients. They were rendezvous with him at different locations, hotels, restaurants, and once, even a park. Each notification on my phone felt like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to see it through. The final straw came on a Thursday evening. Jenna had claimed she was staying late for a client presentation, but her location told a different story. She was back at the boutique hotel, and this time, I decided to witness it for myself. Sitting in my car a block away, I watched as Jenna and her lover exited the hotel. They were laughing, their bodies close as they shared an umbrella. I snapped a photo with trembling hands, capturing the moment that would forever change my life. It was done. I had everything I needed. That night, I didn't confront her. Instead, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the evidence on my phone. The life I thought we had built together felt like a cruel joke. Jenna wasn't the woman I thought she was, and our marriage had become a lie. My mind raced with questions. When had it started? Why hadn't I seen the signs sooner? But no answers could erase the pain. By the time Jenna returned home, I had made up my mind. This wasn't going to end with more lies and false apologies. I would confront her, but on my terms, and with the truth firmly in hand. I went to bed that night knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The calm before the storm was over, and the storm itself was about to begin. The next morning dawned like any other, but everything felt heavier, darker. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Jenna bustled around the kitchen, humming a tune as if nothing had happened. It was infuriating how normal she seemed, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "How's your day looking?" she asked casually, pouring herself a glass of orange juice. "Busy," I replied curtly, keeping my eyes on the mug in my hands. I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Every word she said felt like a mockery of the life I thought we shared. I knew I couldn't confront her just yet. I needed time to plan, to think through my next steps. Rushing in blind with accusations would give her the upper hand, and I couldn't afford that. Jenna was sharp, a natural manipulator when she needed to be. If I wasn't careful, she'd twist this around and make me the villain. After breakfast, I headed to my home office under the guise of work. In reality, I was preparing for the inevitable confrontation. I organized the evidence I'd gathered, screenshots of her texts, locations from the tracking app, and the damning photo of her with the other man. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Later that afternoon, I called my lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Ellen who had been highly recommended by a friend. Her calm, professional demeanor was exactly what I needed. "David, I understand this is difficult," Ellen said after I explained the situation. "But you've done the right thing by documenting everything. The courts will take infidelity seriously, especially if children are involved." "What about custody?" I asked, my voice tight with emotion. The thought of Jenna gaining any leverage over Emily and Nathan made my blood boil. "With the evidence you've provided, it's highly likely you'll get primary custody," Ellen assured me. "Judges don't look kindly on parents who prioritize their own desires over their family." That was the reassurance I needed. Jenna might have betrayed me, but she wouldn't take my children. I hung up the phone feeling a grim sense of determination. The plan was in motion. That evening, I decided to test Jenna's resolve. Over dinner, I casually brought up a story I'd read online about a man who discovered his wife's affair. It was a baited hook, and I wanted to see if she'd bite. "That's awful," Jenna said, feigning shock. "How could someone do that to their family?" I studied her face, searching for any sign of guilt. Her expression was perfectly composed, a masterful mask of innocence. It was infuriating. "Yeah," I said, forcing myself to sound casual. "You'd think they'd have the decency to come clean instead of living a double life." Jenna nodded, taking another bite of her dinner. "People can be so selfish." Her hypocrisy was staggering. I gritted my teeth, resisting the urge to call her out right then and there. Instead, I pushed the conversation in a different direction, asking about her day and pretending everything was fine. If she noticed the tension in my voice, she didn't show it. That night, as Jenna slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past few weeks in my mind. The lies, the deceit, the sheer audacity of her actions, it all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would take the first real step toward reclaiming my life. The next day, I left work early and headed to the jewelry store where Jenna had purchased the necklace. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, greeted me warmly. "How can I help you today?" she asked. "I'm looking for some information on a recent purchase," I said, showing her the receipt I'd found. "It's for my wife." The woman's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Oh, I remember this transaction," she said slowly. "Your wife came in a few weeks ago. She mentioned it was a gift for someone special." I felt a pang in my chest but forced myself to remain calm. "Did she say who?" "She didn't specify," the clerk said, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, but that's all I know." It was confirmation, albeit indirect. Jenna hadn't bought the necklace for me or anyone in our family. She'd bought it for him. I thanked the clerk and left, my hands trembling with barely contained rage. On the drive home, I made a decision. I would confront Jenna that night. No more waiting, no more games. The time had come for her to face the consequences of her actions. When I walked through the door, Jenna was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine. She smiled as I entered, completely unaware of what was about to hit her. "Hey," she said, setting her glass down. "How was your day?" I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery, scrolling to the photo of her and the man outside the hotel. I held it up for her to see, watching as the color drained from her face. "What's this, Jenna?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "David, I can explain." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "I don't want excuses. I want the truth." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. "David, I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You succeeded." Jenna sat frozen on the couch, the faint glow of the photo on my phone illuminating her pale face. Her eyes darted between the screen and me, as if searching for a way out of this impossible situation. The woman who had so effortlessly lied to me for months was suddenly at a loss for words. "David," she began, her voice trembling, "it's not what it looks like." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "Not what it looks like? Are you seriously going to say that?" "Because it looks like my wife has been sneaking around with another man, lying to my face, and destroying our marriage." Her tears started then, the kind that might have once moved me. "Not tonight. Tonight, they were just another ploy to manipulate the situation." "It was a mistake," she stammered, reaching for my hand. "I didn't mean for it to happen." I stepped back, her touch like fire against my skin. "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or burning dinner. What you did was deliberate. You planned this, Jenna. Don't insult me by calling it a mistake." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood over her, a silent sentinel, unwilling to offer comfort. For once, she would have to face the consequences of her actions alone. "Who is he?" I demanded after a long moment. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. "David, please. Don't please me," I snapped. "Tell me who he is." "It's just someone I met through work," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't mean anything." "Doesn't mean anything?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've risked our marriage, our family, for someone who doesn't mean anything. Do you even hear yourself?" She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. She had shattered my trust, and I wasn't about to let her off the hook easily. Where did it start? I pressed. How long has this been going on? Her silence was answer enough. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to decide how much to tell me and how much to withhold. But I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Tell me the truth, I said, my voice cold and steady. All of it. Jenna took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears away. It started a few months ago, she admitted. We met at a networking event. He was charming and... I don't know, David. I wasn't thinking. Clearly, I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. And what? He swept you off your feet. Promised you excitement. Passion. It wasn't like that, she insisted. It just happened. Nothing just happens, Jenna, I said firmly. You made a choice. Repeatedly. And now you're trying to justify it. Her sobs quieted, replaced by a look of defiance. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. You've been so distant, so consumed by work. I felt invisible, David. So this is my fault now. I shot back, anger flaring. You're blaming me for your affair. I'm not blaming you, she said quickly. I'm just trying to explain. No, I interrupted. You don't get to explain. Not after what you've done. I turned away, pacing the length of the living room as I tried to rein in my fury. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? To Emily and Nathan? Or were they not part of the equation when you decided to throw everything away? Her face crumpled, guilt washing over her like a tidal wave. I never wanted to hurt them, she said, her voice barely audible. Well, you did, I said sharply. And now they'll have to live with the fallout of your selfishness. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I ran a hand through my hair, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to walk out the door and never look back. But I couldn't. Not yet. I've already spoken to a lawyer, I said finally, my voice cold and detached. I'll be filing for divorce. Jenna's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. David, no, she pleaded. Please, we can work through this. There's no coming back from this, I said firmly. You made your choice, Jenna. Now you'll have to live with it. Tears streamed down her face as she reached for me again, but I stepped out of her grasp. Please, David, she begged. Don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built. You already did that, I said, my voice breaking despite my resolve. This isn't my choice, Jenna. It's yours. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. Upstairs, I found Emily and Nathan fast asleep, their innocent faces a stark contrast to the chaos brewing downstairs. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart breaking for the pain they were about to endure. As I stood there, I made a silent promise to myself and to them. No matter what happened, I would protect them. Jenna's betrayal wouldn't define our family. We would survive this, even if it meant starting over. I closed their door quietly and retreated to the guest room, where I would spend the night. The bed was cold and unfamiliar, but it was fitting. This was the first step toward a new life, one without Jenna's lies. As I lay staring at the ceiling, I knew there was no turning back. The storm had arrived, and there was no choice but to face it head-on. Jenna's pleas echoed in my ears long after I shut the door to the guest room. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, consumed by the weight of everything that had transpired. The image of her tear-streaked face, the anguish in her voice, haunted me. For all her betrayals, there was still a part of me that remembered the woman I had fallen in love with. But love wasn't enough anymore. Not after what she had done. The next few days were a blur. I moved forward with the divorce, speaking with Ellen again to finalize the necessary paperwork. Jenna was subdued, almost resigned, as though the fight had gone out of her. She made no further attempts to justify her actions, no new excuses to explain away the unexplainable. Instead, she hovered around the house, her presence a ghostly reminder of everything we had lost. I focused on the kids, trying to shield them from the storm that was tearing their world apart. Emily and Nathan were perceptive, though, far more than I had given them credit for. They noticed Jenna and I weren't speaking, that I was sleeping in the guest room. They sensed the tension in the air. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Nathan asked one evening, his wide, innocent eyes searching mine for reassurance. "We're fine, buddy," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything's going to be okay." But it wasn't okay. And deep down, I knew it might never be. The confrontation came a week later, as I sat in the living room, going over some work emails. Jenna entered the room, her face pale and drawn. She held an envelope in her hands, the edges crumpled from where she had gripped it too tightly. "David," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I looked up, wary but curious. "What is it?" She sat down across from me, clutching the envelope like it was a lifeline. "I need to tell you something. It's about why I did what I did." I sighed, the weight of her words settling heavily on my chest. "Jenna, I don't think there's anything you can say that will change what's already happened. Just listen," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please." Reluctantly, I nodded. She took a deep breath and opened the envelope, pulling out a folded piece of paper. As she handed it to me, her hands shook. I unfolded the paper and scanned its contents. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words printed there. It was a medical report, a diagnosis. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. Terminal. "I found out a year ago," Jenna said, her voice barely audible. "At first, I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to burden you or the kids. But as the treatment started failing, I realized I wasn't going to beat this." I stared at her, my mind reeling. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, my voice filled with equal parts anger and sorrow. "Why would you keep something like this from me?" She wiped at her tears, her expression one of deep regret. "Because I was scared. Scared of how you'd look at me, scared of how the kids would react. I didn't want to spend my last months being pitted. I wanted to feel alive." I looked back at the paper, my heart shattering as the truth sank in. "The affair," I said, my voice trailing off. She nodded, shame washing over her. "It wasn't about love or even passion. It was about escaping the reality of what was happening to me. I made a mistake, David, a terrible, unforgivable mistake. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." Tears blurred my vision as I sat back, the paper slipping from my hands. I didn't know what to say, how to process the tidal wave of emotions crashing over me. Betrayal, anger, sorrow, guilt, they all swirled together, threatening to drown me. "How long?" I finally managed to ask. "The doctor said I have a few months, maybe less," she said quietly. "I don't want to die with you hating me, David. Please, don't let this be how we end." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. Finally, I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkened street. "I don't hate you, Jenna," I said, my voice hoarse. "But I don't know if I can forgive you either." She nodded, her shoulders shaking as fresh tears fell. "I understand." Over the next few weeks, I did what I could to support her. The divorce was quietly shelved, our children spared from the devastating truth of what had been happening. Jenna's health declined rapidly, her once vibrant presence fading into a shadow of itself. One evening, as I sat by her bedside, she reached for my hand. "David," she whispered, her voice weak. "Thank you." "For what?" I asked, my own voice breaking. "For being here. For letting me have this, even after everything I did. I squeezed her hand, unable to find the words. She closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips, and within hours, she was gone. The funeral was a blur, a mix of grief and bittersweet memories. Jenna's betrayal would always linger in the back of my mind, but in her final days, she had shown me a different side of herself, a broken, vulnerable woman who had made terrible choices out of fear and desperation. As I stood at her grave, Emily and Nathan by my side, I realized that life would never be the same. But somehow, we would move forward, carrying both the pain of her betrayal and the love that had once bound us together. The rain began to fall, a quiet, steady rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of my heart. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry.